We often speak of the land of opportunity, a place where anything is possible through hard work, a promised land for those chasing their dreams. But every piece of land has another side. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow it casts. And we too easily forget that sometimes the very ground of opportunity we stand on might be a giant tomb, fertilized by the despair and screams of countless others. Today's story is a record of a man who spent 3 months living on top of that very tomb. His name was Jun Seo, an ordinary young man in his 20s from South Korea, struggling to cover rent for his shabby studio apartment and make ends meet by juggling various part-time jobs. He stumbled upon a job posting online that felt like a divine revelation. Hiring short-term worker for 3 months on a large farm in Kentucky, USA, room and board provided, high income guaranteed. Jun Seo had a dream to open his own small cafe. The estimated income listed in the ad was more than enough to provide the seed money to turn his dream into a reality. He saw no reason to hesitate. He packed up his life and boarded a plane to America for the first time, oblivious to the fact that he was not on a runway to his dream, but on a one-way flight to hell. Upon arriving in Kentucky, Jun Seo rented a used pickup truck and began his journey down the endless highways. Upbeat country music streamed from his playlist, and the picturesque American landscape unfolded outside his window. After driving for 2 full days, the scenery began to change as he neared his destination. Vast plains and cornfields stretched to the horizon, and the traces of civilization grew faint. He felt a sense of solitude, as if he were driving toward the edge of the world, but with it came a strange feeling of liberation. However, as he turned onto the final county road leading to the farm, the first note of dissonance appeared, fracturing the peaceful scenery. It came in the form of old, rusted warning signs posted along the roadside. The first sign was ordinary enough: no hitchhiking. The second was a bit more peculiar: do not stop to rescue animals on this road. And the third sign sent a cold shiver down Jun Seo's spine: if you see a child standing on the roadside, do not, under any circumstances, stop your car or speak to them. Jun Seo swallowed hard. What on earth does that mean? Was it some kind of urban legend or a cruel hazing ritual for outsiders? He tried to shake off his unease and gripped the steering wheel tighter. And then, the final warning sign appeared, one that seemed to paralyze his rational thought. If you collide with something while driving at night, do not get out of your car, no matter what it is. Immediately drive at full speed to the next town and report it to the sheriff's office. At that very moment, as if the sign itself were a trigger, the flashing lights of a police car erupted in his rearview mirror. His heart sank. As he pulled over to the shoulder, a middle-aged sheriff wearing sunglasses slowly approached. He scanned Jun Seo's truck meticulously, as if examining a crime scene. The wear on the tires, the empty space in the back seat, even the cargo bed. His gaze was not one of simple inspection. It was a methodical, probing search. "What brings you to a remote place like this, son?" The sheriff's voice was languid, but it concealed a sharp edge of suspicion. With trembling hands, Jun Seo handed over the documents from the employment agency, explaining that he had come to work at a farm owned by a man named Bill. Upon hearing the name Bill, the sheriff's expression shifted for the first time. He slightly pushed up his sunglasses and looked Jun Seo over again. "Ah, headed to Old Man Bill's farm? Huh, don't know if you're brave or just foolish," he muttered to himself, the meaning lost on Jun Seo. Then his demeanor suddenly changed as he put on a benevolent smile. "Well, I'll be." I have some mail I was supposed to drop off for Bill, but it completely slipped my mind. Since you're heading that way anyway, would you mind stopping by my office and delivering it for me? Old man Bill will be pleased to get a gift from his new hire. It was an offer impossible to refuse, a command disguised as kindness. Junseo nodded as if mesmerized and followed the sheriff's patrol car for another 30 minutes until they arrived at a small, dilapidated sheriff's office. "I'll be right back," the sheriff said, leaving Junseo in the dusty lobby before disappearing inside. In the awkward silence, Junseo's eyes naturally drifted to a bulletin board on the wall. And there, he froze. An entire section of the board was covered with what must have been dozens, if not hundreds, of photos of people's faces. Stamped over each photo in stark red letters was a single, damning word: missing. The ages and races of the people in the photos varied, but their expressions were all uniformly happy. A father smiling with his family, a female student in a graduation gown, an elderly couple posing at a tourist spot. Their happiest moments were forever preserved under the label of their disappearance. To Junseo, this small town suddenly felt like a massive black hole, swallowing people whole. As he stood there, paralyzed by horror, a low voice spoke from behind him. "Quite a few, aren't there?" The sheriff had returned, holding a small parcel, and was now standing beside him, gazing grimly at the board. "This town is deeper and darker than it looks," he said. "The land is vast, and we're short-staffed. We can't keep track of who disappears, where, or how. On average, more than 30 people vanish without a trace every year. Those bizarre warning signs you saw on your way in? We put them up. They're not a joke. In this town, you must not show mercy or pity to anything you encounter on the road. Whether it's a man, a beast, or something that just looks like one." The sheriff placed a firm hand on Junseo's shoulder. His eyes were no longer kind. "And you remember my words, son. Out here, you trust no one and no act of kindness. An unsolicited favor is usually the oldest hunting technique in the book, used by a predator to put its prey at ease." The statement seemed to include the sheriff himself, who had just performed an act of kindness by bringing him here, deepening Junseo's confusion. In a daze, he took the parcel and resumed his drive to Bill's farm. As the sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson, he finally arrived at the farm's entrance. It looked less like a farm and more like a small kingdom. He had to drive for over 20 minutes from the entrance gate to reach the main house. In the distance, an old man stood in front of a massive mansion. In one hand, he held a shotgun. In the other, the leash of a hunting dog. This was Bill. Junseo was nervous as he got out of his truck, but his fears seemed unfounded. Bill was nothing like the sheriff's description. Contrary to the portrayal of a hot-tempered, cantankerous drunk, he had a gentle smile and a soft-spoken demeanor, much like a kind grandfather. He welcomed Junseo warmly, offered him a delicious dinner, and showed him to a cozy room on the 3rd floor. The 3 Mexican farmhands he would be working with, Sanchez, Garcia, and Lopez, also seemed quiet but diligent. Life on the farm began peacefully. He would wake up early to work in the fields, and his day would end at 3 p.m. The work was grueling, sweating under the sun amidst the endless cornfields, but this life, free from the noise and competition of the city, brought Junseo a long-lost sense of peace. But even within this tranquility, a seed of doubt was sprouting in the back of Junseo's mind. Why did the sheriff describe Bill as a cantankerous drunk? The Bill I've met is a gentleman who doesn't even touch alcohol. This question grew larger with each passing day. Junseo began to secretly observe Bill and the other workers. They were always friendly, but their actions had a calculated, unnatural quality. They never spoke of their pasts, and whenever Junseo asked about the town, they skillfully changed the subject. Their kindness felt like lines from a well-rehearsed play, and the entire farm felt like an elaborate stage set. Junseo felt increasingly isolated, cell service was almost non-existent, and the nearest town was over an hour's drive away. He felt like a prisoner, incarcerated in a jail made of towering cornstalks. The catalyst for disaster came on a bright, sunny afternoon, 2 months into his stay. In the distance, a familiar patrol car kicked up a cloud of dust as it drove up the long gravel path. It was the sheriff. He got out of his car, gave Junseo a slight nod, and asked for Bill. Just then, one of the farmhands, Sanchez, approached and answered coolly, "Bill's in town buying tractor parts. He took the truck out an hour or 2 ago, so he should be back soon." At that moment, Junseo felt the blood run cold in his veins. It was a lie. Just that morning, Bill had been in the back garage, complaining about engine trouble and working on the truck himself. There was no way he could have driven it into town. The sheriff nodded with a knowing smile. Before leaving, he walked over to Junseo and asked, as if making small talk, "So, how are you settling in? Is old man Bill treating you right?" Junseo's mind raced. Should he tell the truth? Or should he play along with this charade? In a split second, his instincts chose the truth. "Yes, sir, absolutely. He's been incredibly kind and considerate, and he doesn't drink at all." The moment those words left his mouth, the sheriff's eyes sharpened like a blade. He said nothing, simply patted Junseo's shoulder a couple of times, and left with a final, "All right then. Tell Bill I said yen." Junseo knew with a dreadful certainty that his innocent answer had just pulled the trigger on something irreversible. After the sheriff left, the atmosphere on the farm turned icy. The guardedness and coldness that Sanchez and the others had kept hidden were now on full display. Seized by an overwhelming fear, Junseo decided to pack his things that night and escape. But when he opened his door, the 3 farmhands were standing like shadows at the end of the dark hallway, watching him. There was no way out. That night, after dinner, Junseo felt an extreme wave of fatigue and dizziness. He stumbled up to his room and collapsed into sleep, completely unaware that his food had been drugged. He didn't know how much time had passed when he was jolted awake by a tremendous crash from downstairs, followed by sharp screams. Fighting through the haze of the drug, he managed to make his way down the stairs and witnessed a scene from hell. The living room was in utter chaos. A heavily armed SWAT team was tearing the house apart. Sanchez and the other workers were on the floor, bleeding and subdued. Then, from the kitchen, came the sounds of a violent struggle, followed by a single gunshot that shook the entire house. A moment of silence, then a shout pierced the air. "Suspect down! Scene is secure." In the confusion, an officer spotted Junseo and slammed him to the floor, the cold muzzle of a gun pressed against the back of his head. Just then, a familiar figure emerged from the kitchen, reeking of blood. It was the sheriff. He made eye contact with Junseo, who was pinned to the ground, and gave a silent nod. In the cold air of the interrogation room, Junseo recounted everything he had experienced over the past 2 months. When his story was finished, the sheriff let out a deep sigh and finally put all the pieces of the puzzle together. The man you knew as Bill was a mid-level manager for a major drug cartel, and those Mexican workers were his dispatched chemists. The sheriff placed a faded photograph on the table. It showed a man with a shaggy beard and the vacant eyes of a chronic alcoholic. "This is the real William Johnson, also known as Bill," he said. "He was the town drunk, a real nuisance. The cartel targeted him because they knew a loner like him could disappear without anyone asking questions." They murdered him, stole his identity, and turned his massive farm into a state-of-the-art drug manufacturing facility. Junseo asked in a trembling voice, "Then, where is the real Bill?" The sheriff couldn't meet his eyes as he answered, They put his body through an industrial wood chipper and spread his remains over the cornfields as fertilizer. The corn you've been eating for the past 2 months, son? It was probably... The sheriff couldn't finish the sentence. The countless young people who came here looking for work, just like you, were used as drug mules. Once they were no longer useful, they were all disposed of in the same way. All those missing faces on the board at my office. That was them. They all became fertilizer for the devil's acre. Finally, the sheriff pulled a single sheet of paper from a file. It was a ledger found at the farm. Next to a long list of names were dates. At the very bottom of the list was the name Junseo, and next to it, the date his 3-month contract was set to end. That date was just 1 week away. If you hadn't told me that day that Bill was kind and sober, a testimony so completely opposite to the real Bill, we would have been pinning your missing person poster to that board next week. Junseo was speechless. He had been an unwitting cog in a massive machine of evil, walking step by step toward his own death. The peaceful land he had walked on, the sweet corn he had eaten, the clean air he had breathed. It was all a mirage built upon a foundation of death. Cleared of any charges, Junseo returned to South Korea immediately. But his soul was forever trapped in that Kentucky cornfield. He could no longer trust the kindness of strangers. Now, whenever someone smiles at him, he first imagines the hidden blade behind their back. And so, this long story comes to an end. But the real horror may just be beginning. Look around you. The ordinary, friendly neighbors you see every day. Can you truly say with certainty that you know their real faces? Perhaps the peaceful town you live in is itself just another devil's acre, sustained by the screams and despair of those who have vanished.